Damion Russell, an absolutely gorgeous 2-year-old little boy, suffered a tragically short life. This is after his father, Daniel Hardcastle, had fought to gain custody of him, working hard to make sure that finally that little boy would be placed in his care. But then he abused him until his death, just 3 months after he was placed with him. This is the tragic and horrific murder of Damion Russell. Hi guys, thanks for joining me today. Today's case is going to be a heartbreaker, it really is. This murder actually took place about an hour away from where I live, so it feels really close to home. Also, I have a girl who's 1 year of age, and therefore whenever I cover child deaths, even though it's been my career safeguarding children, the reality is it feels ever more present because the only thing I want to do is to protect my baby, and we expect that that's how parents feel about their children. And absolutely, it should be the case for every child born into this world that they are cared for, ideally by their primary caregivers in loving, safe homes. And when this kind of abandonment and betrayal occurs, it's really hard to swallow. Also, just before I kick off with today's true crime video, I just want to shout out the fact that my book, The Serial Killer Next Door, is going to be available on September the 5th onwards in all good bookstores and also, of course, on Amazon. You can pre-order my book if you wish to in the link below. I will be doing some book signings as well if any of you fancy joining me. Also, I'm still touring with my Serial Killer Next Door show, but I'm also moving on to my Killer Cults and Killer Couples show. I'll be all over the UK this year and next year doing that, so I hope to catch you there. Also, thanks to everybody who's watching me on my YouTube community and Patreon. As you know, you're getting extra videos every single week. I'm really enjoying doing the content, but if you didn't support me there, I wouldn't be able to. So just want to give you a shout out of appreciation. Obviously, a lot of the videos that I do aren't monetized because it doesn't agree with the policies and procedures that YouTube operate within, and that's fine. It just means that I can put them on those channels for you and you can watch at your leisure. I wouldn't say pleasure because all the videos that I do involve the saddest situations and stories ever. But ultimately, if you want any more of my content, it belongs over on those channels. Let's talk about today's case. Let's talk about the heartbreaking loss of a gorgeous little boy who, to all intents and purposes, could have been a shining light in this world. And often we talk about potential that is unfulfilled because that's what happens when a child's life is cut short. All of this potential just absolutely cut short at the very beginning of their existence. That is something that is so unpalatable for pretty much every viewer that I have. I know that we share our passion for children and safeguarding. It's inconceivable to imagine that these children fall at the hands of their parents. That's what's really challenging. Strangers, it's horrific when a child is murdered by a stranger, but parents, the very people who have literally been gifted with this ward of care, it makes it very challenging to digest. Damion Russell, he had a really difficult start to his tragically short life. So his parents actually met. His mother visited a tattoo parlour in Blackpool. That's where Daniel Hardcastle worked. So this is the predator in the case that we're talking about, Daniel Hardcastle. Now, if you don't come from the UK, or maybe you've never visited Blackpool, maybe you're not like me. I grew up in a pretty working class area, and part of what we would do ritualistically every single year was go and see the Blackpool illuminations, which is where they put lights out in the street, and we would just go and sit in a traffic jam quite a long period of time, as I recall as a child, looking at the illuminations. I've also got the Pleasure Beach, which was just the most exciting place you could ever go. If your parents could scrape enough to take you to Blackpool Pleasure Beach, it was the place to be as a child. And I had some brilliant, rare days out, but nonetheless, as I said, brilliant days out there. Now, Blackpool has a mixed bag when it comes down to the people who live there. So you've got obviously people who've got beautiful homes, and Lytham St Anne's isn't too far away from it, which is just absolutely gorgeous. But I would say that there are some economic issues now with a lot of people who live in Blackpool, and it's gone from being quite a thriving environment to being, shall we say, less thriving, more problematic. And even though the people there are wonderful, certainly I think on a monetary level, a lot of people do struggle. And with that, obviously, you get certain problems in the local community. It's very resonant of the experience of the north of England with respect, and from where I come from. But like I said, there's this kind of colliding of two worlds, where you've got people just having loads of fun, going out, going to the pleasure beach, going clubbing, hen do's, stag do's, and then you have this undercurrent of problematic experience for a lot of people who actually reside there. So just to give you an overview of what the actual experience of living in Blackpool is like. But Daniel Hardcastle's working in a tattoo parlour. You can imagine, can't you, as I've just described, these transient individuals coming, visiting, going, that there will be a lot of people that decide, I don't know, maybe after their seventh vodka, I think I'll just have a tattoo. Genuinely, we all know friends who've done it. We've all had situations where one of our friends has been like, I think I'm just going to have a tattoo. And you're like, you probably shouldn't because you've had 8 sangrias. Yeah, I think it's a great point. I'm going to go and literally have a sangria tattooed on my body. Don't do that because you've never even shown an interest in sangria till this moment in time. I'm going to go and have an entire sangria bottle placed on my chest. You know, it's never a good idea, but people do it. And this is where the mother of this little boy basically meets Daniel Hardcastle. And what can we say? The pair hit it off. They hit it off, and then they had a brief 6-week relationship. Now, they next met in May 2021, and at this point, Hardcastle learned that his ex was pregnant. So this will have been a shock, understandably, as a guy. If you have a liaison with a girl and then you meet them again down the line and they're heavily pregnant, you might think it's not my child. You might indeed think it is your child, but you're going to have a lot of questions. And part of that will be because you were not informed of the pregnancy. Because I guess on a psychological level, if we get somebody pregnant and they know that they're pregnant and they're continuing with the pregnancy, there would be some kind of, I don't know, throwing it out there, phone call, just to let you know. If that hasn't happened and then you meet them again and they are pregnant, you're probably going to think, well, it won't be mine because she would have told me. And I imagine that was going on for Hardcastle when he learned that she was pregnant. Now, he claimed at that time he was literally told that the child had a completely different father than him. So he wasn't even thinking that he was in the line of fire as far as paternity went. But it wasn't till a family barbecue that actually the woman's father told Hardcastle he was indeed the baby's dad. And that's going to be shocking and it's going to be blindsiding because he genuinely didn't believe that he was the father. And now ultimately she hasn't told him that he's the dad. It's her father who said that he is indeed the father. And so he's got to come to terms with this reality of this impending fatherhood occurring. Now, in the months following, probably as well because of this huge information that Hardcastle's got, and also the fact that they're moving in similar circles, the couple start getting together, they're on, they're off, they're on, they're off. Apparently there'll be reconciliations and then have big arguments and break up. And I guess that what we could talk about there is a potential of toxicity entering. So they've both been put in a high pressure situation where a child is going to ultimately be born. Maybe both of them feel unprepared. Maybe both of them feel a little bit angry with the other because they're not doing whatever they believe they should be doing in the relationship. But it could be that they've connected again to try to make it work because there is a baby on the way. And actually, when they're together, there is a level of toxicity that makes that impossible. So ultimately, they do break up. Now, Hardcastle wasn't present at the birth of Damion Russell, so he wasn't there for the moment that he arrived in this world. But 3 months after Damion's birth, he was actually shown photos of the gorgeous little boy when he met his ex in a nightclub. And again, what does that speak to you about? It speaks to you about immaturity emotionally. I'm not going to judge the female in this situation. She's obviously not guilty of what we're talking about today. But what on earth is happening when you meet the father of your new baby in a nightclub and that's where you introduce him to pictures of his child? That seems like desperately immature. Irrespective of their toxicity, irrespective of their relationship together, the truth is this, there's a baby. You're not kids. You've had a child. It's time to co-parent, even if you don't like each other. The last thing you should be doing is introducing your child on a phone in a nightclub. It makes absolutely no sense whatsoever, and it just pangs of emotional immaturity. But one imagines that Hardcastle in that moment would have felt quite moved. He's seeing a part of him in those photographs. He's had no contact with the baby. He's not been present at the birth. It's all been a whirlwind and a shock, I imagine. And he's probably feeling, and I would say rightly so, that he's been denied something that's really important, which is a level of contact with his child. Equally, he obviously could have done a huge deal more. Now, this gorgeous little boy, Damion Russell, has been born to this situation, which is completely imperfect. And it gets worse because he's actually removed from the custody of his birth mother at 10 months. At this point, he's placed in the custody of foster parents for a period of time. Now, we all know it takes a period of time for social care to get involved and to actually look at a situation familiarly and decide whether a child should remain or otherwise. But there is a high bar. There really is. There is a high bar for removing a child from a parent because they want to keep families together. I know a lot of people hear about horror stories and scare stories where social workers have come in, removed children that were in beautiful homes. But I mean, that is so statistically an anomaly. It goes without saying that you are talking about not even a 1% of cases would fall into that category. For the most part, we actually talk about lessons learned on this channel when children are left with really awful parents, because the belief is the child is best with the parent. Let's give them a second chance, a third chance, and a fourth chance. And ultimately, it eventuates that a child is killed at the hands of the people meant to be looking after them. But in this case, the baby's been removed. So they are clearly deeply concerned for that child's welfare. And that could be because of neglect. It could be because they're worried about a level of abuse. It could be because she is presenting as somebody who is not actually trustworthy to be a mother. But there has been a reason behind removing him from her care. Now, he goes into foster care and he ends up with a family who are lovely. And that foster family described him as a delight, someone who would light up any room with his smile and his chuckle. He did have some developmental delays. He was working with an occupational and speech therapist to catch up, but that's normal. It's so normal. Because I think when we put the word developmental delay, a lot of people conjure in their mind a child who's got some real problematic behaviours physically, emotionally, and also verbally in this case, because speech therapy is a part of what he's dealing with as well. But that's not the case. It's expected that children who've had a fractured experience in their early months are going to be a little bit behind. And then you get these amazing professionals that start working with the child and they just begin to thrive. And in the time that he spent with his foster parents, he was thriving more and more each and every day. So he's really connecting with these foster carers and really growing in this family where he feels safe, secure, compassionately cared for and nurtured, which is what every child should be allowed to basically experience. Now, social workers at this point, they actually contact Daniel Hardcastle. There is a DNA test that occurs, and at this point, it's confirmed that Daniel Hardcastle is indeed the father of Damion, and he decides that he wants to apply for custody of his son. I guess that one of the reasons for that will be because the mother is out of the picture. She's had the child removed. Therefore, he can step in and I suppose step up, ideally, to being a parent. And he fought hard to have sole custody of his son. He fought through the family courts. So he is willing at that moment in time when he initially anticipates that he could potentially be a father, going through the motions of becoming that legal guardian and father through a system that can be really overwhelming for anyone. And he's willing to do that. Now, at first, he ends up meeting with his son at a contact centre in Blackpool. A contact centre is where children will be supervised when they are having contact with their parent or their carer. And the reason for that is to mean that observations can take place. So you can actually have the workers there observing how the child is interacting, how they are reacting to the actual parent, and just to see how the relationship is progressing. People will go to contact centres because there are problems between the parents, and even when both parents are having a relationship with the child, sometimes both parents need to have supervised access so that they can be viewed when they're working through the family courts to make sure that everything is working. Ultimately, there are other situations where a carer has been seen as somebody who's relatively unsafe, and therefore they want to make sure that whenever they have contact with the child, that child is indeed safe, and so on and so forth. There are lots of reasons. In this case, they want to see whether the relationship is becoming bonded. Now, in one report, a social worker actually said, Dad showed lovely signs of affection with Damion, picking him up and kissing him all over his face, causing Damion to giggle loudly. So really positive, clearly showing that he wants to engage physically and he can have fun with his baby. Another one said, Dad was feeding Damion and asked Grandma to continue to feed Damion whilst he went to the toilet. The report went on, when Dad walked back into the room, Damion's face lit up with the biggest smile and Dad offered warm, affectionate goodbyes to Damion. So it's going well. Clearly, the worker who's viewing this, and I'll see relationships that aren't positive all the time, they are validating that this seems to be one that's positive. And also the fact that Grandma's there as well. I mean, that's excellent, isn't it? Because you don't just want to be seeing a child going to a father who might not have the equipment around him, such as support network. You don't just want to see that child sent there because of the frustrations and stresses that can occur when a parent doesn't have that support network around them. But he has, and Grandma's present, and she sounds as well, to all intents and purposes, like a really nice woman. So this boy is not just looking at having a dependent relationship with Dad, it's going to be an interdependent situation where there are different networks of support that can benefit him. So they have this 12-week assessment period. This is in February 2023. And then Hardcastle and his son Damion are placed in the New Springs Family Centre in Preston. And the reason for this is they want to make sure that they can establish that as a father, he is going to offer his son suitable care and protection. That placement considered an out-and-out success. So at this point, Damion's placed with Hardcastle in May 2023 on a permanent basis. Now, don't get me wrong, social care is going to be involved. People will be monitoring this situation, or at least trying their best to monitor it, because there can be teething issues with any new parent, let alone one who hasn't really had that much contact with his son up until now and is new to the parenting game. So at this point, he and Damion move into a flat. It's in Central Drive in Blackpool. Like I said, a very interdependent situation, got support from lots of family members, social workers, the mental health charity Dad Matters gets involved as well. His mother, so Damion's grandmother, she visits every single day to help her son. So again, she's really stepping up too. She's obviously enjoying her new role as a grandma, and she would often babysit for him. So she's really connecting with this child. And also his brother and sister supported him. So they're present. So this really is, as I said, an interdependent situation where the family is caring deeply for this beautiful little boy who has become a later bundle of joy than they imagined, a slightly bigger bundle of joy than they imagined at this point, but nonetheless an absolute bundle of joy. Even when you look at July 2023, his brother actually bought Damion a tricycle for his second birthday. So you can see they're really loving having him as a part of their world. Now, in spite of this all being so positive, in August 2023, there are some hard times that occur, and we'll all relate to this. We'll all relate to those moments in life where everything feels like it's working positively, you're going in the right direction, the trajectory is good, and then life happens. You know, you're content, you're happy, you're feeling a sense of peace, you're thinking, this is great. Life just feels like it's on an even keel, and then bang, boom, everything falls apart. And that happens. So in August 2023, Hardcastle's stepfather dies. So ultimately, he starts to go through a grief process. And also his mother is taken into hospital. She suffered a stroke. So these are big life events, and that's going to have an impact. And when it comes down to Daniel Hardcastle, that impact seems to involve him starting drinking. And as soon as you bring in any kind of toxin like alcohol, it changes your state. And if you are using alcohol to medicate your pain and grief and fear and sadness, often it does not end well for you, let alone for the people who have you in their world and trust you with their care. Now, just 3 months after David Hardcastle regained custody of Damion, on August the 19th, 2023, 999 are called by Daniel Hardcastle. So just let that sink in. 3 months after that little boy is placed in the care of his father, Daniel Hardcastle, a phone call is made to 999. And what Daniel Hardcastle says is that Damion had fallen on a coffee table while playing. That's the nature of the call. That's what he's saying to emergency services. This is a story that he's telling them, that he's fell on a coffee table while playing. Now, I'm sure those of you out there who have children yourselves, and we've all been kids, we've all got a few scars, haven't we? My knees looked like I was in a war zone at some point. I'm one of those kids, highly clumsy, dyspraxic, dyslexic, the lot. So when it comes down to carrying things or spatial awareness, I'm just a little bit off, you know? I'm the person who buys a whole set of glasses and within, I don't know, 3 days, I've broken 78% of them. I don't think you can break 78% of glass. Whatever, I'm throwing it out there. I'm a clumsy individual. In fact, in my family, they refer to me and my own children and my father as having the clumsy gene. It's made up. I don't think there is a clumsy gene answer on a postcard if there is. But what I'm saying is a lot of us will relate to the fact that when we are kids, we are clumsy, we have accidents, we fall over, we break our arms, these things happen. And certainly he would not be the first parent who would witness his child fall over and crack their head on a coffee table. But the idea that cracking your head on a coffee table is going to be fatal for a 2-year-old is just completely left field. It is outside of the realms of ration. I appreciate in the statistical analysis of all accidents at home, some child will fall into the highly unlucky zone of an injury occurring with a coffee table that results in death. I do get that, but it is so unbelievably rare. Because the impact that you would need and the area of the head that would need to be hit in that impact statistically would be a huge anomaly. But this is what he's saying. He said that his 2-year-old son Damien's unresponsive and he's injured. So then obviously they get emergency services out there immediately. This is a flat at Central Drive in Blackpool. Here he meets them. Apparently at that point he's bare-chested. He's got blood on his face and he was performing CPR on his son in the bedroom. Immediately you think about the chaotic scene. This is somebody who's got blood on his face and is bare-chested. Immediately that draws me into this idea of panic. And I appreciate that as a parent, if your child is mortally wounded, you are going to be panicking. But for me, it's more agitation, nervous energy that would be presented in the way that they meet him in that moment. Just the way he seems to appear fits that mindset, in my opinion, than it does an individual who's just struggling because his child has been badly injured. Now, the police and the paramedics instantly skeptical. Literally, they look around and they're like, this does not make sense. We've heard the story that Hardcastle have given us. Apparently, this is just a horrible accident. It's not fitting to the picture that we're seeing right now. So the first thing that they noticed is that attempts have been made to clean the blood from the floor. That's not what anybody with a child who's seriously injured would do. We all appreciate that if you have a child who is in a terrible space and place, all you're going to focus on is the child, is doing something to prevent that child bleeding out further, doing something to make sure that that child is going to be as safe as possible until the experts can turn up. The last thing you're thinking about is, I should probably just get the mop out, clean the floor. That instantly speaks of someone trying to cover their tracks. Also, he'd attempted to clean up Damien's feces from the sofa. You wouldn't do that, not in this situation. You're only going to be doing that if you're trying to present a scene that didn't really exist. And you're doing that because you're aware that what's really played out is so problematic that people are likely going to immediately judge you for it. So these cleanup attempts do nothing to persuade the emergency services that they're dealing with a man who's dealing with a child who's had a tragic accident, and everything that makes them think that they're pointing in the direction of a potential perpetrator. And then to add even more suspicion in this situation, there was bedding and bloodstained clothes in bin bags and the washing machine. So that speaks of somebody who's trying to hide what's actually played out there. And why is there bloodstained bedding and clothes in the washing machine and bin bags? It makes no sense whatsoever unless something truly awful has played out before they've arrived. And again, this is what I'm saying about the agitation and nervousness when they turn up. He looks a certain way, and I don't think it's because he's beside himself that his child is so unwell, or even worse. I think he's actually thinking, oh my God, have I done enough to cover up what's actually played out? Now, as the paramedics are actually working on Damien, so just bear that in mind, we have a 2-year-old little boy who's obviously very seriously injured. Where are you going to be as a parent? Now, I'm not saying that you might be directly present to the child next to them. I would be. I'm sure that most of you would feel that way. But some people are so horrified by what's occurring that they can't look at it. So they're kind of walking around, usually hands across their eyes, hands on head, all the things that kind of are a stress response. We'd expect that kind of behavior bodily. The last thing you would expect, however, is that a parent in such a situation would just, start to casually clean his flat. Just let it sink in. I know that people can go, well, maybe he was in shock. Yeah, the last thing you're going to be doing in shock is just wandering around paramedics whilst they're trying to work on your kid, tidying things away, cleaning up. Because essentially, you have no right to do that because it could ultimately be a crime scene. And as such, the police need to be able to look at the scene in situ without any disturbances. But also, it just psychologically doesn't match, does it? The agony, the fear, the sadness, the horror, you're not going to be thinking, I'll just get out the cleaning products. There is a motivation behind doing that, and that motivation is he is covering his tracks. And actually, he is told to stop by the police when they see them doing this because they need to make sure that they can find all the information that has led to this situation. They need to create that breadcrumb trail that describes how we have eventuated with a child so badly injured. Now, Hardcastle claimed that he was basically in the kitchen washing up. And it's at this point that he assumes Damion collided with the coffee table and collapsed. So classic story, isn't it? Well, I wasn't responsible because I wasn't present with this child, even though this child apparently is somebody who can run so fast into a coffee table in quite a small space that ultimately he's potentially going to die. But I can't tell you exactly how it happened, of course, because I was just washing up. I was just cleaning. I'm very into cleaning right now. That's why I've been cleaning around you all whilst you're working on my child. I'm just a cleaning kind of freak. By the way, his house wasn't tidy. So again, somebody who apparently likes to clean so much wasn't somebody who had a very clean presenting room around him. But clearly, this is a story that he's going to tell. I didn't see anything. I don't know anything. I heard something, and I'm dealing with my child being very injured at that point. Officers at the scene immediately suspect that Damion had indeed been hurt at the hands of his father, Daniel Hardcastle. They have visited numerous scenarios and very quickly can piece together whether they're dealing with an accidental injury or an injury that's come from something far more sinister. And it is certainly fitting the paradigm of being a much more sinister situation. Clearly, you have Hardcastle desperately trying to suggest that he's innocent on every level right from the get-go. He's more interested in cleaning his room than looking after his child that's so badly injured. But also, he's very good at trying to paint this picture of, I love my child, I don't know what's happened, I did the right thing and called you, and I don't know how to explain what's played out. I'm just a really loving father. And this is going to be the way that he acts throughout this case. Now, as paramedics start to carry Damion's body to the ambulance, Hardcastle's arrested. So that's how quick it occurs. And he's arrested at that point on suspicion of grievous bodily harm. Then poor little Damion is rushed to Blackpool Victory Hospital because they firstly need to know if they can save him. And secondly, they need to explore what those horrendous injuries are. Now, Damion had actually suffered cardiac and respiratory arrest, and he also had a very severe head injury. So you're talking about the worst of the worst. This is a 2-year-old child. Severe head injury, cardiac respiratory arrest. We're talking about an infant here. And the doctors do not take much time to recognise that there are lots of other injuries apart from the head injury. In fact, there were, quote, head to toe injuries on this beautiful little boy. And those injuries actually included a forceful adult human bite mark. So he had this adult human bite mark to the right of his upper thigh. He also had fractured ribs. We all know how horrific fractured ribs are. Many of you will have experienced a break of a rib. I have had a break of a rib. It is agonizing, hurts to breathe, hurts to move. And we're talking about a little boy with these kind of extensive injuries. Also, he had bruising across his body. There was a tear to the inside of his lip. It was as if a drinking bottle had been forced into his mouth. And with that forcing in, it had caused a tear in his mouth. So again, that would have been painful to drink. This is a 2-year-old little boy. He's been with his father just 3 months, and we're talking about these head to toe injuries. Now, Damion was alive when he arrived at hospital, but unfortunately his injuries did not sustain life. He died 2 days after being brought to hospital on the 21st of August 2023. He died at 6:22 p.m. He was 2. And he didn't regain consciousness. He was so badly injured that he was actually on life support throughout. And it was when they withdrew that life support, and they withdrew that life support at Manchester Children's Hospital. So he was transported to the hospital that's local to me. It's obviously a brilliant hospital. They'll have done everything they could possibly have done to sustain the life of this little boy, but it just wasn't in keeping with his injuries. And he died as a result of a traumatic head injury. Now, when Daniel Hardcastle was arrested and interviewed, he gave the classic no comment. It really annoys me. Now, there will be lawyers who watch this channel, and I know they do advise often their clients to say no comment because they don't want them to incriminate themselves. You know, being a defense attorney, it's challenging. You are there to pose a story to free your client, not to have them sent down further for long periods of their life. So I understand why sometimes people will say no comment. Equally, I just think when you put yourself in the psychological position of being a parent who's done nothing wrong, why would you not talk to the police? No matter what they are accusing you of, you have nothing to hide. The very fact that he's in a circumstance and situation where he should wish to exonerate himself anyway, he's completely innocent, that's what he's saying, he would speak to the police to exonerate himself. Because you would have a belief that the evidence is going to present the reality that you are suggesting played out. It's not going to be your foe, it's going to be your friend. And speaking to police officers who, to all intents and purposes, of course they're there to catch you out if you're lying. But if you're not lying, they're also there to make sure that as they're gathering their evidence, all that is sent to the CPS, and hopefully you won't have a case to answer. When you go no comment, when we're dealing with such serious injuries and the death of a child he was entrusted with, it does not look good. Immediately, it makes me just want to go, guilty, you're guilty. Because it makes me feel like you have something that you are trying to defend and deny because you know what you've done is indefensible and undeniable. Simple as that. Now, Daniel Hardcastle basically tells the story again and again to the defence when he's speaking to those lawyers and forming the case that it is all about him having a child that he was looking after and loving and who sadly had this tragic accident where he ran into a coffee table and then he began fitting, and that's the story he's going to stick to. Now, Daniel's mobile phone and technology was seized, as is often in these cases, what happens straight away, because you need to find out what were they talking about, who were they talking to, what searches did they make on their phone, because it can be incredibly telling. And I would say that there's a number of really incriminating searches that were carried out. So he'd actually been making a number of searches in relation to the aging process of bruises. Now just think about that. Why would any parent be looking at the aging process of bruises? Because we all know that children get bruised. It happens every day of the week. Children are robust, they're resilient, they are often playing in situations and positions where they can harm themselves a little bit. They get bangs on their knees, they get cuts on their elbows. This is just the natural aging process of a child because they're discovering the world, and sometimes the world is a bit sharp-edged. But even if your child has got a bad bruise on their arm or leg, if you know it happened completely innocently, you're not really interested in finding out the aging process of a bruise. You might be if you've caused bruises and you want to make sure that you don't meet up with anybody for a certain period of time because that bruise is going to look very bad on you as a parent. So again, he's looking for things to give him an inkling as to how long he's going to have to wait before those bruises have cleared up. Also, one of those searches was done just 4 minutes before he called emergency services. He also watched a YouTube video on how to perform CPR before calling paramedics for his son. Now again, if just before you call paramedics, you are looking on YouTube for a CPR video, it's because you're thinking, I've caused this, I need to sort this out. And you're thinking, I don't want to have to call emergency services to see what I've actually done. I want to be able to do this myself. I want to control this situation, and I'm going to make sure that I can do that by going on YouTube, and I'm actually going to find a video, and that's going to bring this child back to life, and then I'm going to be fine. No one's going to know about it. So this is about deception. This isn't about care. This isn't about protection. He isn't thinking, what do I need to do to save my child? Because this is the only option he has. He chose to watch a YouTube video on how to perform CPR before he actually called the people who know, or the people who can advise you. And we're all aware that many of us, myself included, would find it very terrifying to do CPR, but you know damn straight, you call 999 and while you are waiting for the ambulance to arrive at your home, they are talking you through how to do CPR. And he chose not to do that. And the only reason in conscience that you could do that is if you are trying to sort it out yourself because you know you've done something very, very wrong. The rest of us would just be on the phone straight away, crying for those experts to arrive as quick as possible to try to save our child. Now, as the detectives start to piece together the events that lead up to the actual incident, they recovered CCTV, and obviously they have the mobile phone evidence as well. And they're actually able to put together Hardcastle's movements in the days and the weeks before the beautiful little boy Damion was so fatally injured. And they were able to see that clearly Hardcastle's drinking was getting out of control. So numerous occasions he's going to a local shop, buying cans of alcohol. Sometimes he's going numerous times a day, just a few hours apart. So that means he's inebriated constantly, and that means he can't take care of that child. At the end of the day, when you are drinking heavily, you are not present for your child on any level at all. They become secondary in your life because your primary concern is the actual drinking behaviour. Now, Damion wasn't seen on the CCTV. So he's going to this shop, he's getting the alcohol, his mother at this point is incapacitated. She can't be a gran because she's had a stroke. And this guy is actively leaving, clearly, Damion by himself whilst he goes and procures alcohol. So immediately he's neglectful. On the very basic level, he's highly neglectful doing that. Also, on August the 17th, he messaged a woman at 11:50 p.m. He actually texted her, "Come mine, dickhead, bring some booze with you." Now, I don't know about you. If I'm not sat at home on a Saturday night at 11:50 p.m, shall we say, and I'm not receiving such loving, chivalrous messages such as, "Come mine, dickhead, bring some booze with you." So not only calling me firstly a dickhead, which I would say is not the most complimentary suggestion, but also then saying, "Bring some booze with you," meaning I'm literally like a delivery driver of alcohol. I'm just going to throw it out there. If I'm not doing that on a Saturday, I don't know what I'm doing. If I'm not dealing with what Chaucer would refer to as courtly love, shall we say, with such absolute romance in my life, I'm failing. It's as simple as that. But that was what he was texting this woman. He also tells her at that point he can't go out as he's got his son with him. But, and this is going to be tantalising for all of you, you're all going to be like, well, that would have done it for me. You know, I'm not sure about the dickhead. Maybe the asking me to go and spend money on booze, that could have enticed me. But if there was one thing that I guarantee would have made I call that Uber immediately and turn up within 15 minutes, it would be the fact that he offered her a free tattoo. Yeah. Have a free tattoo. Come to mine with booze, because we can all get really drunk then, even though I'm already drunk. And then what I'll do is I'll just get my pens out, get a bit of ink in it, start, needling your body. And we'll see how it goes in the morning when we see whatever it was I created in a stupor. One can only imagine that would not have ended well. But clearly, he has great faith in his tattooing capacity, that he believes that he has the allure of Brad Pitt at that moment in time. So like I said, at this point, he's not really thinking about his son. He's thinking about alcohol. He's probably thinking about sex. He's certainly thinking about alternative exploits aside from parenting. Now, when it came down to the post-mortem, it was horrific. So that post-mortem revealed 80 injuries. There was a litany of injuries, and they said that those injuries had started at least 3 days before the serious head injury that actually caused his death. So this boy has sustained ongoing systemic abuse in his home at the hands of a man who fought hard to get custody of him and now has abandoned care completely. Now, the trial occurred at Preston Crown Court. He pled not guilty. Of course he did. He stuck to his story. This was just a tragic accident. My son ran into a coffee table and died because of that, in spite of the fact there were 3 days worth of injuries. It is blindsiding, isn't it, when these individuals think that they can just keep saying, "I'm not guilty." And even though that litany of evidence is physically present on the body of the deceased child, still, they think if I just put my head down and keep saying the same stuff, someone's going to believe it. Throughout the trial, Daniel Hardcastle went for the whole, I was a devoted father. I fought the family court system to take care of my child. He claimed that his son was injured after falling and hitting his head on a coffee table. He said that Damion was a really clumsy tot and that he'd collided with the coffee table when he was playing with his toys in the living room. He did concede that he had bitten Damion's leg hard enough to leave teeth marks in it. And we can just at that point go, sorry, just like, what are you describing yourself of? I'm a devoted father. Are you? Are you that devoted that you were going to the shop and getting alcohol and texting women when you should have been looking after your son? Yes, that's how devoted I am, because I actually wrote in the text message that I couldn't go out for the evening with the lady who I like to lovingly refer to as dickhead because I had a child to look after. But you did get caught on CCTV constantly going to buy alcohol without your child present because your child was apparently at home without you. Well, that might have happened, which therefore I would suggest means you're a highly neglectful parent. And if you're saying that your child is clumsy and can cause themselves injury because they have this apparent clumsiness, the last thing you would want to do is to leave your child unattended at home where injuries can take place because you are out buying alcohol. I'm a devoted father. I fought for custody. You can keep saying that, but actually, I think I'm forming the picture of a man who bit his child so hard that days after, if not a week after, he had the bite mark indentations in his leg. I was so devoted, I was just roughhousing and playing with him. That's what you do as a dad. I'm just going to, I'm sorry, I pressed that button. It's the ejector seat. And I say ejector seat, but it ejects into a human-sized liquidizer. Again, that didn't happen, the last bit, but the rest of it, you know where I'm going with it. I'm not suggesting liquidizing people. I'm just saying, like most of us, I have to cope some way. And in my head, much like the glass elevator out of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, I have a ejector button which can then send somebody directly into a human liquidizer. It works on a mental health level for me. But anyway, this is the story that he is telling, and the fact that he admits to biting Damion hard enough to leave teeth marks is harrowing, isn't it? Who on earth does that? I mean, in the history of my experience as a mother, I have never left a mark on my children's body, and I don't know any adult within my network who has done anything like that. It is harrowing to hear that he admits to this whilst trying to report that he's a good and loving father. Now, John Jones, Casey, he's defending this man, and of course, he's painting the same picture. Loving and caring single father, throw it in, single father. Loving and caring single father, as if they don't exist, and if they're unusual. Because what he's really saying there is, look, a man who's bringing up his child. Women have done that ad infinitum. That's why the term single mother is something we're a lot more au fait with. But of course, John Jones Casey's throwing it in. Look how unusual this man is. A man who would actually bring up his own child. It's ludicrous, but I can understand psychologically what he's trying to do. He's trying to get the jury to go, well, I mean, most men are just useless and would never do this, which is stupid. It's entirely untrue. The vast majority of dads, the brilliant dads, whether they're in their child's life or whether ultimately they've split from the partner and are separately rearing them together. The idea that just because he's a single father who's bringing his kid up, that makes him a good dad, ludicrous. Absolutely ludicrous. You can have sole custody of your child and be a saint or a sinner. It's as simple as that. But John Jones Casey is saying this man looked after this little boy to the best of his ability. Yes, which wasn't a very good ability, because this gorgeous little boy's dead. So the idea that you're purporting in court on a defence level that because this guy's basically living with this child and hasn't abandoned him, that makes him good enough, and that he did the best of his ability. Well, if the ability of him is that he can murder him, yes, he did. He did the best of the ability that he had, which was to kill the child. And also he brought in this apparent string of witnesses from the childcare sector who testified in court about how great he was. Yes, because in those initial observations, he was good, but they are tiny pinpricks in time. They are punctuation marks between the vast reality of being present 24/7 versus for an hour here or there. You can be the best person possible when all eyes are on you and you are being observed in situations and scenarios and you've decided, I want custody of my child. You'll do everything in your power to seem like you're the best person possible. But when you have to withstand parenting on a 24/7 level and you are by yourself and dealing with stress, they are absolute things that can trigger behaviors that are toxic and problematic. And in this case, that's what happened, no matter what his defense is saying. And he even goes on as a defense counsel to say that the experts who are wheeled in and wheeled out, we know, to support the defense or support the prosecution, but nonetheless, they are experts. He said the expert views were just theories, not backed up with fact. Yes, that's right, because they weren't there when it happened. So because every human being can't have a group of experts just following them around. I mean, wouldn't that be helpful in these cases? You know, you act in a certain way, you kill someone, you go to court and they're like, can we just bring in the life experts that have been around this particular individual? Oh, there we have the pathology expert, we have the forensic expert, or we have the health and social care expert as well, or we have the behavioural expert, brilliant. Just bring them in and they can identify exactly what happened during that crime. That's very, very helpful. And then we'll go from there. You know, we wouldn't need juries, would we? Because you'd have a group of experts who've been present watching it actually happen when the crime played out. Probably some questions about why the experts hadn't intervened when the crime played out. But apart from that, we'd find out because of the fact that the experts would also have experts that were following them around, wouldn't they? There'd just be a massive, massive amount of experts, following experts, and at the end of the day, following the person who committed the crime. It would just go on forever, ad infinitum, wouldn't it? All these experts. The idea that that would be necessary for anybody to be found guilty is ludicrous. You bring experts in when they're required. And of course they're theories, but they're theories based on enormous amounts of knowledge, enormous amounts of academic studying, and also when it comes down to injuries with an understandable reality based on the historical experience of other injuries relatable to the injuries of the child, you can firm up what had happened. So yes, not backed up by seeing it play out, but you can't say not backed up by facts because there are factual explanations for injuries because you know that those experts have had that much experience and are so schooled in this discipline that they can clearly state whether it's a homicide or whether it's an accident. Now, he also, as a defence counsel, went on to say, what is the definition of a theory? So he asked the jury in his closing speech. A theory is an idea or a set of ideas which are intended to explain facts and events. These experts were not there. They gave their own opinion to explain facts and events as to what could have happened. That's as far as they go. That is the danger of this. You have to be satisfied so you are sure that Damion died because his father killed him. That's it. If you are sure of that, you will find him guilty, and properly so. Your duty is to give a true verdict according to the evidence, and it is not sheer guesswork or speculation. You will have come across cases where there is serial cruelty, neglect and maltreatment of children. Children who have been neglected all their lives, maltreated all their lives. For instance, baby P. This is not that sort of case. This case is about something that happened on the 19th of August last year. Catastrophic in its consequences, of that there is no doubt. Tragic, of that there is no doubt. He then went on to say that there had been evidence from 3 different groups, experts, police officers, and those who knew Damion and who saw the defendant and the boy together. He said, the police officers came in after, the experts came in well after the event, but the evidence of what Daniel Hardcastle and Damion were like together at the time is evidence which the experts have ignored, either because it was not relevant or not consistent with their theories. But I would say we can just theorise. It's not very kind going and leaving your kid in a home by themselves whilst you bob off to get some alcohol. You know, that's not a theory. It was on CCTV. And also, just because at the time of those experts finding out about the death of the child, or the police officers having to go in and deal with the crime scene after it occurred, just because they were there after the event. The people who were saying nice things about him were there before the event. No one was there during the event, and surely the event itself was what we need to look at, not nice ideas about the potential of this parent before this horrible, utter nightmare played out. But apparently not, according to the defence. He also talked about how some nursery workers said he was a great dad, but others told a different story, which I'll talk about shortly. And he concluded that the prosecution had sought to show that Hardcastle had deliberately, intentionally and willfully inflicted injury and pain on his son, yet there had not been a single person in the case who had spoken about bad behaviour by Hardcastle, which could have harmed the baby. He said, on the contrary, he was a good father who was doing his best in trying to bring up his son. Well, let's be clear, it was not good enough, no matter what. It was not good enough because this little boy died. He then summed up with, let us therefore abandon theories. Let us concentrate on the evidence. The prosecution say the defendant is guilty of murder, the deliberate inflicting of injuries with intent to cause death or really serious harm. He said, Daniel Hardcastle says it was a catastrophic incident, but it occurred by accident. It doesn't matter how beautiful your theory is. It doesn't matter how smart you are. If it doesn't fit the evidence, it's wrong. Some of the evidence may put the defendant in a bad light. It may show there are certain things which were wrong at home in Central Drive, but it doesn't prove that he is a killer. Come on. It does. Throwing it out there. It does prove he's a killer. It proves he's a killer because the kid had 3 days of injuries. It proves he's a killer because the child died. And also this idea that you can't suddenly become a monster is ludicrous. People can have particular toxic traits. They can have issues within their psyche. And in the right circumstances, such as when they are in a stress situation, stress makes perpetrators more violent, or when they additionalize their experience with things like alcohol or drugs, we can see somebody who toes the line on the whole suddenly act in a way that is disastrous and catastrophic. We see it happen all the time. Hardcastle had gone through an intense period of stress. His mother had had a stroke. His stepfather had died. He was drinking heavily. That's not what the nursery workers were looking at when he was being assessed. That's something that happened in the interim, and that painted picture by the defence is incomparable with the reality of evidence that's been gathered. It is obvious this child has been murdered by his father. Now, of course, when it comes down to that bite mark, that's a problem because he's taken responsibility and said, yeah, I did bite him. But what he does there is he says, I was just playing rough with him. That's what happened. I was just having fun with him. But experts said there is absolutely no way at all, no way whatsoever, that as a result of that bite mark, he would have been enjoying play. Instead, he would have been in agony. He would have been screaming. So that isn't roughhousing. That's somebody intentionally damaging a child in a very vicious, animalistic method. It's as simple as that. And the pathologist said there is no way that this came from roughhousing and play. This child suffered the most violent injuries that one could imagine, and that's completely inconsistent with the father's claim of how he got them. And also, even though the defence is trying to say that all these nursery workers are saying what a great father he is and how the relationship's really good, and there are no witnesses saying anything bad, it's not true. Because in the weeks before Damion was fatally injured, a manager at Horside Nursery, this is where he was registered, she contacted Children's Services raising concerns that Damion had only attended a small number of sessions. A social worker also tried to contact Hardcastle over concerns that he hadn't taken his son to occupational therapy appointments, which is really important when he's got speech and developmental issues. A foster carer who had looked after him, she'd actually tried to arrange a visit. She got no response from Hardcastle at all. So he's failing foundationally on every level to engage with services and also to provide Damion with the care and the consideration that he needs when he's adjusting to his new living situation with him. Also, a family support worker from Blackpool Council's Children's Safeguarding Team, they tried to arrange a visit. She was going to call around to the flat unannounced because she didn't receive a call from him. So she decided that the only way forward was to just turn up. So she was waiting, but unfortunately she didn't get to do that unannounced visit because all these horrible things played out, and also because on August the 4th, his stepfather had died, and then on August the 15th, his mother had suffered a stroke. So there were obvious reasons there as to why contact wasn't at the level it should have been, but nonetheless, it's indefensible. No matter what's going on in your life, your priority is your child, and particularly when that child has got adjustment issues, when your child needs to have certain appointments, you need to be taking that child to those. You need to be giving them that level of stability. Now, pathologists determined that Damion had been inflicted with a very severe head injury, and they said that this was either inflicted by forcefully shaking him and then banging his head against a solid object, or directly causing Damion's head to collide with a solid object with such force that it caused significant injuries to his neck and to his eyes. So imagine picking a child up by the feet and then just slamming them into a hard object, or taking their head and slamming them down into a hard object. We're talking about that kind of force. We're talking about a really high level collision in a car kind of force to cause the kind of injury to his neck and eyes. Now, the prosecution, I think their case was very solid. They said that Daniel Hardcastle had started drinking more in the days and weeks before the assault, and he'd also isolated himself from his support network. And as I said earlier, 2 nights before the deadly attack, Hardcastle had spent the night chatting online to a woman that he'd met online, and he just left his son alone in the flat whilst he went to the shops to buy alcohol. So it's just this picture, not just of abuse, but ultimately of selfishness and neglect. He's thinking about his own needs, his own problems. He's not thinking how blessed I am to have received the opportunity to care for a child that I fought to look after. He's just completely obsessed with his own issues. And we have to remember, his mother was going around every day to help him out. So when she had a stroke, that destabilizes the support system. That means he hasn't got the foundation that's coming in to actually take care of his child. So now he's dealing with the stress and the frustrations and the care all on his own, dealing with escalating drinking habit without mum coming and soothing him in any way, shape or form. That will have all exacerbated what we've talked about so far today. Now, when it came down to the jury, they took less than 2 hours to decide on the verdict. And on the 10th of July 2024, 31-year-old Daniel Hardcastle was unanimously found guilty of murdering his son at Preston Crown Court. Of course he was. As the verdict was delivered, apparently he just looked up at the ceiling. It's interesting because we talk about feelings being down when we gaze and thoughts being up. So he was thinking, not feeling in that moment. I guess that was just because you're thinking, right, well, that's it now. I'm going to be going down for a very long time. It's kind of over, isn't it? You know the verdict has been read. Psychologically in a situation where all power is gone, there's no hope at your freedom, and you're now just going to wait for the sentencing because that's going to tell you how long you're going to serve and whether you're ever going to be free again. Now, on Thursday, the 11th of July, Daniel Hardcastle was sentenced. And during his sentencing, there was a really moving statement read on behalf of the little boy's foster mother, because, of course, Damion had been looked after for a period of time and was thriving with that foster mother. She said, seeing how quickly he was developing and bouncing back from his earlier troubles in life was a true testament to his spirit and what a strong young man he was. Damion was just the cutest little man. I will always remember his big eyes and wide smile. He used to do this adorable thing when you walked towards him. He'd put his arms out and bounce himself up and down, and you could just see his excitement fill his face as he giggled with joy. I'll always cherish that memory. Damion loved bath time, splashing around in the water. He'd enjoy being a cheeky chap and getting us wet, his big eyes looking up as he smiled and giggled away. Such a special memory of Damion and how much he enjoyed life. Damion was a very sensory child. I remember him being mesmerised by light and crinkled toys. He was only just beginning to explore the world around him, but I know he would have continued to explore and marvel if he'd been given the chance. Damion would love to watch people. He would follow their movements and their faces and would always bring a beaming smile to everyone who was lucky to interact with him. A lot has been made about Damion's walk. I will always remember it as a walk that would make me smile. He would just walk almost like a little duck. It didn't just make me smile, it made everyone around him smile at what an adorable little man he was, finding his feet, ready for his adventures. I cannot emphasize enough what a delightful bundle of joy Damion was. He was so laid back, always happy to toddle and just to be lovely around. Words will never do his memory justice. Looking to the future and the opportunities Damion missed out on, it's heartbreaking to know he will not get the chance to fulfill his potential. It was his birthday yesterday. And every year, I will now think of the milestones he will miss. He will never start school. He will never celebrate his achievements. It has been taken away from all of us. There were so many opportunities out there for him that he will never grasp. Damion could have grown up to do whatever he wanted, with a loving family and support network around him, but this was taken away from him. Damion is a big loss to everyone. For such a little man, he leaves a huge void with his passing. It just shows what a spectacular little lad he was. The pain we all feel now he is gone is a reflection of how special he was in life. I will always remember and miss him and the extraordinary place he will ever hold in our family. I cannot begin to understand what Damion went through at the hands of Hardcastle and why someone would want to do something so evil to such an innocent ray of sunshine. Thinking of how Damion suffered in the days before his death will stay with me. I felt I had to attend and listen to the trial as a representative of Damion and to continue to honour him. But realising the force and brutality that must have been inflicted on him, it breaks my heart. It's been nearly impossible trying to put into words what a fantastic, incredible, cute, happy young man. I will never be able to do his brilliance justice. I will never understand why Damion was not allowed to live his life. We are all worse off in a world without Damion. Being part of Damion's life was a true honour. He will stay with me forever. I'm so glad that foster mother was so passionate about the meaning of that beautiful little 2-year-old boy. He's only a memory for them now. That's all he can ever be because his life has been stolen. But in the time that he spent with her, the mark is so indelible within her conscience, within her heart, and it's powerful. It's sad to know that a woman who was entrusted with his care and could have given him so much more had him removed from her so he could be returned to his father only 3 months later to be murdered in such a brutal fashion. And of course, we've got Damion's grandmother who's a victim, Linda Hardcastle. She said that her only grandson, Damion, made her happy and proud and that he had an amazing laugh. She said, Damion made me so happy. Now I just feel sad, heartbroken. I think about him every single day. There is so much I just don't understand, and I probably never will. There are so many questions. I have questions that will probably never be answered. I want to remember everything about Damion, about who he was. I loved Damion so much. I still do. I always will. And again, she's a victim. She was so engaged in her life, and then unfortunately fate befell her and she had a stroke, and I understand that for her she will feel a level of guilt that she wasn't able to be present to protect this child that she was so obviously in love with in so many ways. When it came down to sentencing, he was sentenced to imprisonment for life. Judge Mrs. Justice Hill said Damion was covered in injuries top to toe and front to back. She told Hardcastle that he had grossly abused his position of trust. She said, "You were Damion's father and he was in your sole care. He was a helpless child. It was your duty as his father to protect him, especially given the difficult start he had in life and his inability to rely on his mother to care for him." She then sentenced Hardcastle to a minimum term of 22 years before he'll be able to apply for parole. At the time that he had the sentencing passed, he sat in the dock with his head bowed. He showed no emotion as he was led to the cells. She also discharged the jury from ever having to do jury service again because it was so traumatic, the things that they had to hear and witness. Now, outside of the court, D.S. Davies, who investigated this case, said, "It is incomprehensible that a father could carry out such acts of cruelty on his son. Many of the people in my team have been in tears carrying out this investigation, including those who have children themselves. It is emotionally draining. Hardcastle is a vile and despicable individual. Like any young child, Damion had the right to be loved and cherished by the man who should have done everything he could to protect him. Instead, he found himself subjected to a horrifically violent and sustained assault which caused the injuries which sadly led to his death. Only Daniel Hardcastle can say exactly what happened on that fateful day or why he did what he did. But this was no childhood accident that ended in tragedy. The nature and extent of the fatal injuries deliberately inflicted by Hardcastle were done with intent to cause at least really serious harm and with a direct cause of Damion's tragic death. Tom Snape, who is a senior Crown prosecutor for the CPS Northwest, he said, Damion's life had been cruelly cut short by his own father, Daniel Hardcastle. As his father, Hardcastle should have cared for him and protected him from harm. Instead, he assaulted Damion so violently and with such force that it caused extensive injuries which led to his death. Everyone who has worked on this case has been deeply affected by the circumstances of Damion's untimely death. I can only hope that those who loved and cared for Damion can feel some sort of justice with the outcome of this case. Stephen Chapman, who is an independent scrutiniser of Blackpool's children at multi-agency safeguarding arrangement, said, in August 2023, we were notified of the tragic death of a 2-year-old boy from Blackpool. Our thoughts remain with the family and everyone affected by his passing. During initial meetings with relevant agencies, it was agreed that a local child safeguarding practice review would be held. Following today's judgment, the review will be completed. So they want to look in and see whether anything could have potentially changed the outcome. I doubt that anything could have, because this happened quite quickly. It escalated without a doubt over 3 days at the very minimum, maybe weeks. But understandably, even though child protection agencies were involved and they were seeking to visit and do an unannounced visit to check out what was happening, sadly, they never got to do that because Damion was murdered. And ultimately, whether it will be noted that more could have been done or otherwise, I can't say. I will put that in a description when I follow it up down the line when that review is out. But I genuinely think in this case, it's likely that the social services would not very much have been able to change the outcome. The only hope that we could have had is that this man, Daniel Hardcastle, had never been given custody of this child. That would have been the perfect scenario, that he just stayed with the actual foster mother and would have continued to thrive. But you know, this man, to all intents and purposes, had shown his best side to those people who were observing him, and that best side delivered him custody of his child. It's just such a shame that when they signed the custody papers, they also signed Damion's death warrant. There's no other way of looking at it. I'd love to know your thoughts on this case. Just harrowing. He had him 3 months. 3 months. And he died because of those 3 months. 12 weeks. 12 weeks is all it took for a beautiful 2-year-old little boy to go from a thriving, big, smiley, blue-eyed beauty to ending up on a mortuary slab. It's inconceivable, guys. Let me know your thoughts as ever, and I'll see you again next time. Take care and be safe.